The far-reaching spread of COVID-19 has brought vast changes to various sectors around the world. Education is no exception. Although open and distance learning is nothing new, the pandemic, along with technological advancement, has fostered educators and universities to bring in innovation in providing learning opportunities and access to resources for off-campus students. What are the prevailing trends and developments in this field? And how does artificial intelligence step in? In this seminar, Professor Asha Kanwar, President and CEO of the Commonwealth of Learning, presents a glimpse into the post-pandemic picture of open and distance learning and advises educational institutions and academics on how to cope with the current needs.
My topic today is putting innovation at the heart of open and distance learning. What are the possibilities? I will first look at the context in which we operate today, followed by an exploration of the kinds of innovations that we see in education. This will lead to the question of whether open and distance learning is innovative or not. I will then focus on the status of research in ODL to gauge the emphasis on innovation, and in conclusion, I will outline how we need to proactively nurture a culture of innovation to refresh, rethink, and redesign ODL policies and processes for transforming education. But first, the context. We live in a disruptive age where change is happening faster than ever before and in more unpredictable ways than we can imagine. 3 years ago, no one could have predicted the pandemic or foreseen its magnitude. Technology is growing faster than anyone can keep pace with. Remember, 6 months ago, there was no ChatGPT, and today everybody is always talking about it. So this presents exciting opportunities, but also unprecedented risks. We are encountering the increasing impact of climate crisis in our daily lives, and because of this, the world is reeling under recession, learning to cope with the phenomenal developments in technology and the changing nature of jobs. The jobs that exist today were unheard of 10 years ago. Today, there are thousands of app developers in Uganda. 10 years ago, this job didn't exist. And the jobs of the future will need to be aligned to the green and blue economies. Life expectancy has gone up, and those born after 1997 will well live to be 100 and more. In fact, a Harvard scientist tells us that the person who will live to be 150 years old is already born. Thank God it's not us. So how can the education sector respond? Recognizing the magnitude of the crisis, the UN Secretary General convened the Transforming Education Summit 2022 in New York to urge leaders, and more than 180 leaders were present at this, to invest in equitable access to quality education for all by harnessing the potential of technologies. So let us look at the 5 key issues that they identified. The first was learning loss. The pandemic has deepened the learning crisis, and a study in the Netherlands records a learning loss of about 3 percentile points, with higher losses among students from less educated homes. The second issue relates to equity and inclusion. And even within the rich countries, the OECD countries, huge disparities exist between students who go to privileged schools and those who study at disadvantaged institutions in terms of access to computers, the internet, and a quiet place to study at home. Even Stanford, 60% of the students face these disparities. In the last 6 months, we have seen an explosion of innovations in generative AI. We need to look at generative AI from the perspective of the teacher, the learner, the institution, and very importantly, the context. And the ITU report last year indicates that while 60% of the global population uses the internet in Africa, the percentage drops to 40. So that means 60% of the population in Africa, and it's a young population, the median age is 19, is without access to the internet. The same pattern is visible in the ownership of mobile phones. And in terms of gender equality, women are 12% less likely to own a mobile phone than men. So how do we ensure that our teachers can harness the potential of ChatGPT, which can become a powerful personal assistant without leaving anyone behind? The fourth, of course, is about reviewing curricula and pedagogies to become more relevant to the needs of the 21st century. This would involve moving from digital literacy to AI fluency. Pedagogical considerations would require focusing on learnability, not just knowledge development, but learnability, which is the desire and ability to grow and adapt one's skill, knowledge, and values on a continuous basis to remain employable, productive, and sustainable in an ever-changing world. So what does this require? Learning, unlearning, and relearning on an ongoing basis. What has emerged from the pandemic experience is the need to support the psychosocial well-being of our students and staff. And as a study indicates, students who participated in social emotional learning scored 13 percentile points higher than those students who did not. This indicates the need to focus on social emotional learning in both teaching and learning. Today, we are in a crisis situation, and as we know, crisis generates creativity. How can we convert this creativity into innovation in education? So now to the next question, does education foster innovation? Measuring innovation in education nearly a decade, an OECD study found that several innovations were implemented relating to pedagogy, assessments, inclusion, and teacher development. But what was really significant was that higher levels of innovation led to improved learning outcomes and more satisfied teachers. And this was even well before COVID-19 and is more relevant than ever before now. During the pandemic, both ministries and institutions had to respond to an unprecedented situation. And out of the 56 Commonwealth member states that we work in, 49 are developing countries. So radio and TV saw a second coming in many developing Commonwealth countries. Digital platforms and OER were provided. Free SIM cards were distributed to parents, and alternative assessments and exams were held. For example, in South Africa, the University of South Africa is a distance learning institution. When students had to submit assessments and they are sitting in some shanty far away, they didn't have computers. And this is a very traditional university, which has a vault where they hide the papers and then open after several passwords to bring the papers out. But even they innovated, and students hand wrote the assignments, took photos on their smartphones, and sent those PDFs to headquarters for assessment. So even they became innovative. So how can innovation become part of the ongoing DNA of education? Let us look at 4 types of innovation: incremental, disruptive, architectural, and radical. Any type of innovation among these 4 is dependent on 2 factors: demand and technology and framework. First, does the innovation create a new demand or address the existing demand in education? And second, does the innovation use a new technology and framework, or does it use an existing technology and framework? So the first is incremental innovation, which addresses existing demand and uses technologies and frameworks to improve services and practices. One example of this is using mobile phones, camera, and even community radio, which were used during the pandemic to keep the doors of learning open. Disruptive innovation happens when an existing demand is addressed through the use of new technologies or frameworks. And one example of this, and I'll deal with it at length, is the move from campus-based to distance learning when there was a need to democratize and universalize education for all. The third is architectural innovation, which addresses new demands by using existing technologies or frameworks. For example, the new demand for lifelong learning led to the invention of MOOCs, which was using existing technologies that were already available for e-learning. And similarly, we already know andragogy, heutagogy, and we can use these existing models and pedagogies for promoting lifelong learning for all. Radical innovations take place when new technologies or frameworks are used to create or reach a new demand. Today, there is a demand to reach 773 million illiterates globally with literacy programs. Another is to train 15 million additional teachers in sub-Saharan Africa by 2030. So where are the radical innovations to reach these constituencies? If we look at the field of education, we mostly find incremental rather than radical innovation. So now let's come back to the issue of, is ODL, open and distance learning, a disruptive innovation? Let me look at Clayton Christensen's definition of disruptive innovation. But he talks about disruptive innovation in a business as a process whereby a smaller entity with fewer resources is able to successfully challenge established players and displace incumbent businesses by addressing a specific need that had not hitherto been addressed. So what are the characteristics of disruptive innovation? First, it is a process, not a product or service. It is usually regarded as having lower quality in the beginning. It takes time to challenge and disrupt established businesses or organizations, and new models emerge as a result. But we must also remember that not all disruptive innovations do succeed. This diagram shows how disruptions take place in business. The new product enters the market at the bottom to satisfy the needs of low-end customers. This need is not being addressed by the existing dominant players in the market. The new entrants improve their performance and quality over a period of time and eventually dislodge the dominance of the big players. In India, businesses started offering small sachets of shampoo. So poor people couldn't offer for their children to buy big bottles of shampoo. They were buying small sachets, which were very affordable. And this is how that business disrupted the bigger players. So using Christensen's disruptive innovation model in higher education, we find open and distance learning as the innovation at the bottom of the pyramid that continues to challenge mainstream face-to-face higher education. We know that campus institutions have become mainstream over 900 years' existence, and the state, students, and parents continue to sustain the demand for them. However, ODL began to cater to those who were left outside the mainstream higher education. So ODL as an innovation is now manifesting itself as online and blended learning and MOOCs, especially as we've seen during the pandemic. So disruptions emerge when mainstream providers fail to cater to the changing needs of society. These are supported by innovations in technology and give rise to a new breed of providers. As we have seen, distance and online learning have grown and evolved over the last 50 years, keeping pace with and taking advantage of technologies. In Professor Taylor's 5 generations of distance learning models, we heard about the evolution of distance learning from correspondence education to multimedia to online, as we can see now. Traditionally, open and distance learning has always adopted a blended approach. But now, we hear it's an innovation. We knew this innovation 50 years ago, but nobody was listening to us. And the reason why we were adopting a blended approach was to keep in mind issues of social justice so as not to forget the unreached. And research shows that blended learning is more effective in developing countries, and the role of distance learning becomes even more important as the global community seeks to transform education by providing quality learning opportunities for all. And this includes persons with disabilities. 15% of the global population has some form of disability or the other. And studies show that more persons with disability join open and distance learning institutions as they don't need to travel to campus. ODL is more flexible and offers content in various formats so that learners can read, watch, or listen to lectures. ODL provides also a degree of anonymity where students with disabilities can interact with professors and peers without feeling discriminated. So how can we invest in innovations to make education more accessible and inclusive? The pandemic led to innovations where open and distance learning was harnessed for poverty alleviation. The Open University of China trained 50,000 villagers in rural areas for livelihoods during the pandemic. My own organization, the Commonwealth of Learning, partnered with Coursera, where they gave us free licenses under a workforce recovery project, which has trained over 300,000 Commonwealth citizens, many of them first-time online learners. And you know that the completion rates of distance education and MOOCs is very low, 10% or less. But because we provided help desks to provide learner support to our first-time online learners, the completion rates went up to 45%. And we also provided counseling with these desks located in ministries in developing countries. As people live longer, they will need new opportunities for learning. China seems to recognize this, and one manifestation is the newly established National University for the Aged, located in the Open University of China. And we know Open University of Japan has been catering to the third age for a long time. ODL institutions have always aspired to seek parity of esteem with campus institutions. But now, with the global acceptance of ODL, it is time to get out of that mindset and innovate and play a leadership role in transforming education. What will be the role of research? So let us review some of the ODL research over the past 4 decades and see whether it fuels innovation or not. Research trends from 35 years of publications in the journal, it's very prestigious, Distance Education, outline how the focus changed over the years from institutional consolidation to educational technology to quality assurance, virtual universities, and more recently, MOOCs and OER. If we review research trends since 2014, we find that the focus has mainly been on expanding the remit of open education, the role of educational technologies, and the quality of online learning. My organization commissioned a meta-analysis which concludes that technology integration in class resulted in a significant improvement in knowledge and skills. Online learning was also perceived as comparable to in-class learning and could lead to some improvement in learning outcomes. But the most significant finding was that blended learning performed better than only face-to-face instruction. It's also interesting to note that most of the research conducted during COVID-19 focused on the post-secondary sector with an increased interest in medical and health sciences. Over 1/3 of the papers were descriptive and 43% adopted quantitative approaches. Now, these are studies which happened now in April this year. This is a recent study on the critical issues in ODL, came from China. It highlights the need for longitudinal research, sociocultural sensitivity, more attention to reaching the disadvantaged, and a need to revisit open and distance education theories. And this came from Turkey. Another study on artificial intelligence in online distance education highlights the value of artificial intelligence in promoting adaptive and personalized systems, predicting student behaviors, and, interestingly, the need to ensure a human-centered and ethical approach. COL has been developing this journal for over 10 years, Journal of Learning for Development. This provides a forum for publication of research with a focus on innovation in learning and its contribution to development. And we are also offering an online free course on developing research and evaluation skills for distance educators, because this is one area where distance education hasn't focused that much on. So what have been the trends in the last 4 years? Some of the most engaged themes have been how OER, open educational resources, can be best leveraged to support technology-enabled learning, a strong interest in the concept of learning for development, and the innovative ways in which technology can be harnessed to address the needs of different contexts. And according to my colleague, Dr. Tony Mays, who is the editor of this, the common themes that emerge from the most recent issues are use of appropriate technology tailored for context as a recurring theme. But he also suggests that we need to keep thinking about the why learning for development, why must learning lead to development, the how are we going to use technologies, and to evaluate what we are achieving, lessons of experience and research, in order to close the feedback loop into improved practice. The research is not just for putting on the shelf or on our CV, it must actually make a difference to policy and practice. So it's very clear that ODL institutions are committed to research and to innovation, but the missing link seems to be the gap between research and action. For example, how relevant is the research we conduct to our day-to-day operations? Does our research on new pedagogies influence the way we format content or how we provide tutorial support? Does the use of educational technology guarantee innovation? Do we see much discourse on innovation theories or the carbon footprint of open and distance learning? And this is a very important thing, as climate change becomes a bigger crisis. Can distance education reduce the carbon footprint of education? Bill Gates said that the biggest emitter of carbon is the construction industry, cement, steel, so on, not travel as we always suspect. So will building more brick and mortar institutions cater to the need actually cause a bigger environmental degradation than we expect? So the Open University UK did a study of online courses in the UK and campus institutions, and they found that the online had a lower carbon footprint. So we said, well, that's the developed world. Let's try Botswana, which is a developing country. And we did a study there. We looked at the Botswana Open University and campus institution, and we found that the carbon footprint of the Botswana Open University distance learner was 1/3 lower than that of the campus counterpart, mostly because of travel and other things which are involved. So these are big areas because the jury is still out. We haven't come to any solid conclusions on this because these are very few research studies which we have at the moment. What are the opportunities for research in the use of technologies to take ODL to the next level? We know the private sector is always in the forefront of using advanced technologies. We are still, thinking about it, discussing, and they go ahead and implement. Artificial intelligence can generate data that can help us to customize and improve student learning, help the strugglers. Blockchain technologies become more relevant in the age of micro-credentials and student mobility because you can't tamper with things, and those tamper-proof certificates will help institutions to have a better comfort in admitting people who come with those certificates. AR, VR can help develop skills at scale. This is another priority. When you talk to governments today, they say we want skills development. And of course, robotics makes it possible for us to provide teaching assistance and providing personalized supports to thousands of learners. So what do we need to do to strengthen innovation going forward? ODL institutions need to align more closely with the needs of their societies and promote innovations that lead to sustainable development. Creativity enables the workforce to generate new and original ideas, while innovation enables them to turn those ideas created into practical solutions for complex problems. It is time for us to refresh, rethink, and redesign our policies and practices. Technology is leading to various innovations in teaching and learning, but technology by itself is an invention. It is only when technology is domesticated according to specific needs and contexts that innovation happens. Otherwise, it only succeeds in widening the digital divide. As we know, innovations are not about technology alone. They can relate to products, processes, models, methods, even external relations and partnerships. And in addition, we need to ask ourselves, innovation for whom and innovation for what? It's not enough to have an innovative pilot project. How can we achieve scale? How ethical are our innovations? And what will be the impact on people and the planet? So that brings us to the question that are innovators born or can we develop them? You know, the OECD has brought out a report in which they found that teachers think that creativity is something which either people have or don't have. So now they're trying to integrate creativity into the curriculum, not overload the curriculum, but integrate it and then try to measure it. And they've developed a roadmap of how it can be measured, because we know that what isn't measured never gets done. Innovation skills are very simple. In the book, The Innovator's DNA, Dyer et al. Identify innovation skills that all of us can learn: questioning, observing, networking, and experimenting. These skills can generate new ideas and promote out-of-the-box thinking. How can we ensure that these skills are integrated in teaching and learning? In fact, if you want to use ChatGPT usefully, you have to go back to your skills for questioning. Unless you ask the right questions, you won't get the right answers. So your questions have to be very specific. The pandemic created a momentum for self-directed learning. When people were locked up, they were doing MOOCs. How can we build on this momentum and this experience to create an ecosystem that promotes lifelong learning for all? We know lifelong learning includes the whole spectrum of formal, non-formal, and informal learning. And simply reforming current education systems will not be enough. Countries will need to continually skill and reskill their workforce, both young and old, throughout their lives. And here again, open universities have been a leader. We already have a history of providing lifelong learning. You look at the mission statements of some of our universities, you see these statements express a commitment to lifelong learning. You see Open University of Malaysia, Sukhothai Thammasat Open University, and the Open University of Sri Lanka. I just took the Asian Open Universities. Providing access to higher education to large numbers was one of the key contributions of open universities, massification, democratization, and so on. But providing access is no longer enough, so we need to rethink this role. It's imperative to prepare learners to be employable, which is why we have to teach them the skill of learnability. And it also requires a balance between theory and practice, a focus on hard as well as soft skills, a curriculum that addresses the needs of the labor market. And the orientation will change to providing certification based on proven competence rather than the number of hours or years attended. As the climate crisis assumes greater urgency, we need to integrate key sustainability concepts into the curriculum. This would mean adopting a green learning agenda. And what's that? This agenda focuses on three things: developing skills for green jobs that would help make the transition to a low-carbon economy, green life skills for a more sustainable future, that all of us must change our behaviors, and skills for a green transformation that address social justice. How do we redesign our pedagogy and make it more fit for purpose? Since we are no longer testing only knowledge but also skills and competencies, we need new ways of assessing performance. Openness and flexibility requires that we recognize prior learning and make it possible for learners to transfer their credits anytime, anywhere. AI-based assessment constantly provides feedback to learners, teachers, and parents about how the students learn, the support they need, and the progress they're making towards their learning goals. Micro-credentials are leading to shorter, just-in-time courses that can be taken at one's own pace and time. And this is something which open universities can lead in. Formal assessments and proctoring systems suffered major setbacks during the pandemic, where institutions adopted innovative approaches to build flexible models and make assessment more authentic. ODL institutions need to redesign learner support by integrating psychosocial dimensions and paying greater attention to the well-being of staff and students. Technology hubs, learning analytics, chatbots can all be deployed innovatively to improve learning outcomes, and AI can be harnessed constructively to play a key role, keeping in mind all the other issues of ethics and regulatory concerns. So finally, if we need to put innovation at the heart of ODL, we need to develop an innovation mindset. One element of this would be to regard every challenge as an opportunity. Remember, crisis generates creativity. Another would be to take risks and learn from failures. It doesn't have to be success all the time. And finally, we need to adopt collaboration and sharing as a strategy. We talk about it, but we don't actually do it. So we need to do that. And with that, let me thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you.